Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Artist Block, and today we're going to be talking about drawing with lines. Now, I've done a line series before, and I think this is going to be a more philosophical outlook, and while I'm going to be talking about procedures and how I do my own personal line art, I'm going to be talking about more why lines are pretty important and how lines can be used in a composition, and in more than one type of composition. While I am working on digital pieces, this can actually be applied to traditional media as well, so pay attention if you're interested in it, otherwise you don't have to and you can go on to the next video or previous videos too. Everything is pretty good. Alright, when we first talk about line, the first thing you might think about is point A and point B. When we are introduced to lines in art class or any other type of class or physics or biology, chemistry, if there's lines anywhere, we think about lines as a point between point A and point B, and how those pieces connect. And in art, it's a similar way, but how you use those lines is a completely different way than your physics class or your chem class or whatever you'd be using lines in. We oftentimes can think of lines as ways of guiding somebody around a composition, showing them what can and can't be, and showing them how things can be confined, or what can just be pushed to the absolute limits, or if there's no limits, seeing what we can share and what we can see. Looking at this line here, lines come in many different types of ways. They can be curvy, they can be spirals, they can be broken up, they can be jagged, they can be very smooth like this one, or if we turn the scale up on this one, it could even have some form of texture based on what we have. And that's just the quality of lines. Lines can be loose, they can be tight and focused, and there's just a whole lot of things that lines can be, but the main instance is that lines can be from between point A and point B, and they show you through a piece. Let's take a look at a piece that has such a thing. If I show you this here, and we start from the very top here, you could see that I've done line art that is kind of choppy, but it has texture to it. This line art can be used as a good example to show you how this leads you through a piece. These lines have different textures and different points, different thicknesses and thinnesses, and they cohesively bring you to different parts of the piece. These lines give you a sense of scale, they give you a sense of blending and a sense of other things like that eventually make a whole piece more interesting as a result. Now this whole piece, of course, is color and everything else, but the basics, if I take every single thing away from this, I can get quite a bit just like this. Hold on, let me get all of it out of the way. There we go. If I take everything away from here, you could see the basis of what has been taken and what is used when you're creating line art. This is the basics, nothing special, nothing crazy, and how you can find and use the lines to create something more interesting as you go about creates a piece that's more memorable and more interesting as you go about. I'm not going to go ahead and do all of this, but you can see that already it's starting to have a really interesting effect just by using the lines to give it texture, and it guides you throughout the piece. And there's more than one type of line here. Look, you could even see that there's simple sketch-like lines here, and then coming over to this area over here, there are even lines that guide you around the piece like this, from point A to point B, to point C up here, down to point D over here, and all the way down to point E, F, and so on and so forth. And it guides you along the piece, giving you a sense of semblance how you want to take and go through the piece. Next thing lines can be used for is containing and giving a way of holding people in or holding images in to have people stay confined to a certain space. Now this is a robot. I drew this robot and I've already colored the robot, but I'm going to slowly bring everything back so you all can see what I'm talking about for this particular instance. This is a robot for a piece that I'm working on, and notice how everything is very smooth. It's not necessarily uniform, but that's okay. Everything here is meant to contain. It's meant to be self-contained, and every single thing here is connected to something else, and it's made and it's used in a certain way to hold everything in place so people can look at something between a figure and the abstract background that this piece has. Lines have a way of breaking things up and keeping things confined, so things can be more cohesive and more separated between lights, darks, or figure and abstract. It just depends on how loose or how tight your lines are. And these lines are pretty tight because they're very much conforming to a sketch that I drew on and I worked on. I could even show you the sketch here. If I take even just the lines off, and take the lines off, I could even come down to the very bottom here. I believe I could show you the sketch if I could find it. But for the most part, I think I might have gotten rid of it. Here we go. But for the most part, this is a way to contain. And as you can see, by slowly adding different things that were a part of this particular piece, you can see that I'm adding back everything, and more different parts are being contained to keep this figure away from the final background, which I'll show you in a second. I'm going to go back slowly. It's coming back out. You can see that it's slowly coming together. Oop, that's actually the sketch line. Boom, and boom, and oh, one more thing. Where is it? Oh yes, the background. Like this. As you can see, there's like a whole lot of things that are going on here. There we go. This contains everything, and it takes this area here, this figure right here, and it keeps it away from this interesting little background that has all kinds of different things all its own, and it helps keep everything contained. So lines can be really useful when containing people or leading them around. Lines can also be used as texture and form. This is a line piece that I did for a screen print, and I did it on digital and moved it elsewhere onto a traditional medium, but this is just a way of getting you to move around a piece and figuring things out that way. Look at how there's different amounts of line quality. Over here, we have very thin, very narrow, and very faint lines that are being used in a cross-hatching and hatching pattern. That's actually another video that I have. Check that out if you're interested in that. But you can see that as I go through the piece, there are more pieces like this intricate piece here that has a little bit more thickness to it. And then even more so, over here, there's even more thickness. Differentiates different forms, different turning, different amounts of figure and how things are being shaped. And it gives it a sense of depth that just a regular line by itself can't portray. So we can see that there's all kinds of different things going on over here. And you can see that the more I build up the lines, not only does it show how to go from this point here all the way down to point B down here, but it builds up value, it builds up texture, and it makes things a lot more interesting. So when you back it all the way out, it gives you another sense of the piece, which is really interesting too. And this also plays with color. Now, this is all a black and white image, of course, but if I were to move this out a little bit, let's actually make it, see if I can get a little bit further. Notice as how the cross-hatching and the hatching don't become black and white anymore. They become gray. They become a little bit less solid. They become a lot more focused, or a lot less focused rather. And as I come back in, those grays kind of kick back in and they become black and white once again as you become closer and closer and closer. And you see the amount of detail and time that was taken to create those scales. This is the power of using lines as texture. You could probably get in real close, so you could even see the texture down here. Let's take a quick look at this. That the lines are being used to create a sense of roughness, a sense of grizzle, and a sense that gives this picture its innate nature. Now, also, lines can be different colors, and while I can't really show you on this one, I can show you at least here that lines don't have to just be black. Lines can be brown, they can be blue, they can be red, they can be white, and they follow the same amount of color theory that any other art piece or any other type of art style can portray. And it's how you use these lines and how you use them with creativity that gives you a certain style, or gives your pieces a certain style, or it gives you more ideas to work with. And now we're going to move on to the actual drawing aspect. How do you do line art, and how can we take some of these things that I've shown you and actually use them in a way that's actually interesting? Now, traditional artists might be using regular ink pens and pencil. That's perfectly fine. You can use that to solidify sketches, make them more presentable, and you don't have to necessarily do these techniques. You can just make a sketch and make the sketch more refined. That's perfectly fine. People do that all the time. I do it sometimes. Sometimes I don't even like working with ink, but this is a good way to render something and make things interesting. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit on my screen, just a bit, so I can have everybody see what I'm working on. I've got different things going on here, and I got to try to figure it out. I'm going to kind of zoom in. That's good enough. Actually, zoom in just a little bit. There we go. So now we've got different things going on here. You can see that I've got my layers on my right, and you can see that I've got my drawing on my left. I've got different tools that I can use at my disposal over here, and I can take different types of textures or different types of tools to make a different effect based on what I want. But I often just go with this little pin that I found on Clip Studio, and I'm gonna go ahead and look over here at my full piece. I'm gonna zoom out, and you can see this is my persona, and I'm going to be inking this piece, or at least a good half of it, so I can show you how I would do something like this. And let's go ahead and get started. So digital is a little bit different from traditional, of course. We have a little bit more utility. You can make opacity layers, and you can turn them down so you can trace over something. If you want to use onion skinning techniques as far as the traditional media, you can definitely do that and use tracing paper and then draw over it with a different piece of paper, and you can do stuff like that. You can draw directly over things, and that's just called inking, or it's just, finally doing a final layer or something like that. And you can do a whole lot of things. Right now I'm doing a technique called, I call it blue lining, when it's basically taking a sketch layer of a different color and then going over with black line or whatever to give it a more clean appearance. And you can do that too if you take blue color pencil or red color pencil, whatever you can actually see, and draw over it with ink afterwards. Or you can just do it with pencil, either or. I'm going to be using a black thing though, and I'm going to test my thickness real quick, make sure that's everything nice. Over here, I've taken the opacity, and I've turned it all the way down. Got it about right here, this is about 42%. Let's get it to about 28. Let's do 30, make it a little bit more even. And I'm going to make the layer right here. I'm going to make the sketch layer a little bit lower on the tier, so everything now officially draws over the sketch layer. And I can see that I have different textures and different line weights, and we can work with that. We're going to start up at the ear right here. I tend to start with ears because I like to start at the highest point, work to the lowest point, and then come back up to the highest point. And we're going to go ahead and get to it. First thing you want to do when you're starting with line art, you want to kind of test your lines. Do you like what you're working with? Does this look interesting to you? If it does, go ahead and move on. I'm going to go down to about 6 here. It looks pretty good here. And then we start with our first thing, line weight. We've talked about line weight before, I'm pretty sure, but if not, I'll give you a quick rundown. Line weight is just simply the amount of pressure that you put on a pencil or whatever writing implement that you're using when you're drawing. And there are different things that you should keep in mind when you're working on line weight. As I'm going down here, I'm considering where this is on the piece, and I'm looking at how much light would probably reflect onto this line, this lined work. The outline usually thins as you go from a area of higher concentration of light, and it gets darker as you go into an area of lower concentration of light. So overlaps, and a couple other things like opposite sides. They tend to be the places where the lines tend to be the thinnest. And you could always go back with an eraser on digital, or if you are in traditional, you could just use a white pen. You could just do that too. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some of this, and I'm just going to casually stroll here. I'm going to keep in mind a couple of things as I'm doing my line art. First thing, of course, is trying to do everything in as little effort as possible. You don't want to go and have all kinds of lines everywhere. You want to try to, at the very least, follow through with a stroke. And if you don't like it, you could always just erase it, or you can always go back on it. But you want to try to give one clean stroke, kind of like this. Lifting up your pencil to change directions or to change focus, using your wrist as a certain type of as a fulcrum to make your lines, that can be an issue. You see, as you notice, I have far less reach than if I take my elbow, which is what I'm using right now, and drawing away the whole piece. I can get all that area. So there's a little bit of science to it as well. Just keep that in mind when you're working with your pieces. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to come down here. Here we go. Come back up here. And I'm just kind of winging it right now. I don't have to do anything too crazy, but I kind of want to at the very least, go. It's good enough. Kind of want at the very least get a sense for what I'm doing. I'm looking at my line art as I go. I might zoom back in and zoom back out when I'm working on something, seeing if I actually enjoy what I'm working on. If I don't, I'm going to come back and change it. And I could always thin these lines out on digital at the very least And once again, if you have a traditional piece you might want to use, or keep a white ink pen or something like that handy around you at all times, that will save you quite a bit in mistakes and other things like that. This is a less permanent method than things like linoleum or dry point, things like that, which are pretty hard to use line in and consistently get it as even as you want it to. You can have a little bit of forgiveness with this. I'm gonna go in and got a little bit of texture now as I add these different lines that come together to make a grayscale. I'm gonna add a little bit more line thickness because this is the interior part of the face where probably not as much light might get to in this particular shot. I'm gonna move over down here to the shoulder. Right here is gonna be a little bit more thick. I'm gonna fade it in like that. And then it's gonna overlap here. Kind of turn my camera here. Like that. I'm gonna give it. And then it's gonna overlap here, make it a little bit thicker. And then like that. Add some texture there. And there we go. That is one half done. Goodness gracious, that was my snake. He made a little noise. Hey, dude. He made a little noise. Anyway, here we go. I'm gonna finish this up here. I'm just going to finish up the lines, and I'm going to do the nose, half the nose at least. Here. There we go. Tapped like that. I'm not gonna slow this down because I'm gonna speed this up rather to show you the end product or anything like that. It's a little bit easier to see somebody intuitively get into the line art process. And here we go. Let me go ahead and I'm gonna finish this up. Like that. And presto chango, we have a line art piece, or half of a line art piece. Take it off and you can see that we've done a little bit of line art, and we could always go back in and clean up some stuff, connect some things like this here, grabbing the eraser tool, coming back in, controlling the confines, controlling what I want people to see and how I want people to see it. And we're just going to fix it up just a little bit. We're not gonna do too much because there's some other stuff that we can do with this piece. Go, let's take this one. I'm just gonna thin it out just a touch. And let's do a little bit of that. Come back into that. There we go. That's good enough. And that's good enough for now. That's pretty good. Let's zoom back out. And boom, there we go. We have that going on. There's a couple things we could add to make this more interesting. I talked about texture before. Let's add a little bit of texture. Let's go with this here. I'm going to take my thing and I'm going to switch lines. I'm going to switch to a more pencil-like sketch. I like the pencil quality. And I can go ahead and add this right here. I'm going to add a little bit of textured line to give a little bit of variance. Come back out. How do I like that? I'm going to do this again. This time from this way out. Forgive me, I'm feeling fine, but I got a stuffy nose. There we go. Come back in, do like this. Zoom back in, and you can see that now we have a little bit of texture going on. Let's come back in and do some more texture down here. We could add some line weight here, and we could add it and change the angles to not only give us a sense of direction, but a sense of style and a sense of interesting texture and otherwise to it too. And do that. Let's come back here and do this same thing over here. And I can work with a smaller pencil if I wanted to. Give it a little bit of texture here. So I'm gonna do like this. Let's add some more down here. Let's add his nose. Okay, come back in. Like that. Alrighty. Take the line weight next and kind of just give you a little sense of variation. And let's just pretty much it. We can go on forever and we can do all kinds of different stuff, but notice how it's already a little bit more interesting. Now, it's not better per se. That's up for you to decide how you want to make this work or how you want something else to come into fruition. But the basics are pretty much there. You can do whatever you need to do to get from point A to point B, and you can make your confines, you can make your philosophy however you like, but at the end of the day, line art and lines in general are a pretty good way to get your point across and to make something a little bit more polished than it normally would be. That's pretty much it. Lines are pretty fun. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like and comment on the video, and also subscribe if you're interested in seeing more content. If you don't like the video, tell me why in the comments down below, or just say hello. That'd be nice too. If you guys want to see more content, feel free to check my channel, my YouTube channel page. We got a lot more coming up, and I've got some projects that I'm going to be working on and sharing with you all in the near future. It's been NoodleDog. Enjoy your lives and enjoy art. Have a good day.